Lacey Fletcher was a prisoner of the couch. What happens when those we trust most turn out to be the ones who betray us? Lacey Fletcher's story is a heart-wrenching tale of neglect and despair. How did a young woman, once full of potential, end up in such horrifying conditions? This is a story that will leave you questioning the very fabric of human decency. Stay with us as we unravel the shocking details of her tragic end. Lacey Ellen Fletcher was born on November 25, 1985, and raised in the small town of Slaughter, Louisiana, a close-knit community of fewer than 1,000 people. Her parents, Clay and Sheila Fletcher, were well regarded as pillars of the community and prioritized their public image. Regular attendees at the local church, they were seen as dedicated civic figures. Clay served as an official with the Baton Rouge Civil War Roundtable, a nonprofit organization, and held a seat on the town's planning and zoning committee. Meanwhile, Lacey's mother, Sheila, was a town alderman, an elected role where she helped shape local laws and regulations. In addition to these duties, Sheila acted as an assistant to the city prosecutor and even served as vice mayor. Together, they were respected figures whom the town relied on and admired. Even though people may have pictured Lacey to be a recluse, she did not start out that way. Lacey made friends with everyone at school and in the neighborhood and was described as a vibrant, smart, fun girl. She was very outgoing. People who knew her from her childhood said she was one of the sweetest girls you could ever imagine. She liked playing volleyball and was even on the volleyball team at school. When she wasn't hanging out with her friends, she would listen to Mariah Carey or watch Disney movies. She also really enjoyed listening to country music. Lacey faced challenges from a young age. She was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and severe social anxiety, which got progressively worse. Her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, finally opted to homeschool her in the 9th grade after she allegedly experienced bullying at age 14 at her school, Brownfields Baptist Academy. Confined to her parents' home, Lacey's condition deteriorated over the years. Her severe social anxiety and autism made it difficult for her to engage with the outside world. This is when Lacey became nonverbal. Those who knew Lacey said it was hard to see her go from friendly and outgoing to suddenly being a recluse. She was essentially hidden away from the world, and so she lost most of the friendships she once had. The friends she had left said that at 17 and 18, Lacey didn't mature the same as the other kids. She was more into Disney movies. She would still invite the other kids over, despite being more withdrawn, but it was to now watch Disney movies with her. This can be how Asperger's syndrome works. The kids are very smart, but don't always mature as quickly as others. Then as Lacey turned 20, she took a turn for the worse. Some sources claim she suffered from a rare neurological disorder called locked-in syndrome. However, this is just a theory. We don't know that she was ever diagnosed with it. There are other physicians who debate this even being a condition. For those of you who don't know what locked-in syndrome is, this is where your brain works, but your body doesn't. Locked-in syndrome is a rare neurological condition in which a person is fully conscious and aware, but has almost complete paralysis except for eye movements. People with this syndrome can think, understand, see, and hear, but are unable to speak or move. So Lacey would have been fully conscious and aware of her surroundings, but unable to move. She would not have even been able to swallow her own saliva. 90% of people with locked-in syndrome die within the first 4 months. Some survivors say they are fully cognitive and can also see and hear everything, but just can't respond. As a result, she spent most of her days on a leather couch in her home. Over time, this couch became both her prison and her deathbed. What we do know, however, is that Lacey really did not move from this couch for over 12 years. She lived, ate, breathed, went to the toilet on this couch, etc. If it wasn't locked-in syndrome, then what was keeping Lacey on this couch for 12 years, or maybe even longer?
I don't know, she just looked like a young woman. She was, she had these little, what do you call the little weights that you hold in your hand? The little dumbbells.
She was exercising?
Yes, she'd walk from her house around the circle, and she used to do that, you know, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week.
Creepily, neighbors and friends began seeing Lacey less and less. Age 21 was the last time Lacey was ever seen by anyone outside of the home. Her neighbor, Robert Blades, had told the news media that he had seen her at age 21 exercising on the road by her parents' house using small weights. After that, she was never seen again. Robert said years later he asked her dad, Clay, what Lacey had been up to. He asked if she went to college or got married. Clay then said, "Oh no, she's still here. She's fine." Clay then changed the subject. Basically, no one saw Lacey from 21 to age 36, and no one ever questioned anything. Nobody could have imagined anything bad was happening or that she was just rotting on her parents' couch.
I can tell you that we didn't know that they had a daughter until this happened.
Oh, okay.
And my husband worked shift work, and he saw everything at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And how long have you been a neighbor? So like you didn't even...
I've lived here 12 years.
So you've lived here 12 years, and this entire time you didn't even know there was a girl, a daughter that was living inside that home?
No. Between like the sheriff's department and the slaughter cops and the coroner and the EMS and the fire department, there was a lot of them.
And it's really fascinating because here in the South, you are very neighborly with each other. You talk to each other, you check in. So to have this neighbor live down the street for 12 years and not even know a daughter was there, it really leads me to believe, on top of the other conversations I've had with other people, that really their daughter was just a well-kept secret that they just kept away from everybody.
Then there were all of those who were just never aware that the Fletchers even had a girl. A member of the round table Clay was on had told News Nation it was a complete shock this happened because he never even knew Clay had a daughter. Just like this neighbor of 12 years never even was aware that Lacey existed. No one would have imagined that not only was Lacey alive, but that she was still living at home with the upstanding citizens everyone knew her parents to be. They would have never imagined that amidst the rest of the cleanly, neatly kept Fletcher home, that Lacey Fletcher's personal living conditions were horrifying and utterly deplorable, that she had been living in a dark, cluttered room filled with filth and debris, that the stench was so overwhelming and a haunting reminder of her isolation. This all remained a secret from the world until January 3rd, 2022, when Lacey's mom, Sheila, called 911 and reported that her 36-year-old daughter, Lacey, had stopped breathing. When authorities discovered her, she was in a deeply distressing state, severely malnourished and unable to move properly. Her skin had become grotesquely fused to the couch where she had spent so much of her time. It was as if she had been trapped in a living nightmare, abandoned not just by her family, but by the world around her. Sheila even tried to act like a victim on the call. Dr. Ewell Bickham was the East Feliciana Parish coroner who examined Lacey Fletcher's body after her death. He was responsible for determining her cause of death and investigating the circumstances surrounding it. In this tragic case, Dr. Bickham reported that Lacey died from medical neglect and chronic malnutrition, combined with severe infections from untreated sores. There were parts where you could see straight through her skin and muscle right to her bones. When her body was found, she had been sitting on the same couch for so long that her body was partially embedded in it, and she was covered in ulcers and fecal matter.
It still bothers me today. And like I said, I've seen every kind of death there is. I've seen elderly people die of natural causes. I've seen suicides, homicides. I've seen everything there is. I've never seen a homicide like this. I have never seen an individual, a human being, literally tortured and allowed to die while she is alive. I've never seen that in my life. I've seen decomposed bodies of someone that drowns. You find the body a week later. That's one thing, and they're decomposed. Lacey did not decompose. She rotted in her own body, in that hole, in that sewer, in the couch.
Dr. Bickham's findings highlighted the extreme neglect Lacey endured, which ultimately led him to classify her death as a homicide due to severe medical neglect. His role was significant in bringing attention to the case, contributing to the charges brought against her parents. Her death was determined to be the result of prolonged medical neglect, which had reportedly begun as far back as 2010, though the exact time she last moved from the couch was unknown. According to the coroner, a range of complications from severe neglect ultimately led to her passing, including chronic malnutrition, acute starvation, immobility, an untreated ulcer, a bone infection, and sepsis. It was concluded that Lacey had been deceased for at least 1 to 2 days before the 911 call was made, and her death was ruled a homicide. The sight of her was heartbreaking. Her legs were red all over, and there were sores that went all the way down to the bone. Her legs had melted into the padding of the couch. Underneath her was a buildup of urine and feces. Her body tested positive for COVID-19, and she had not seen a doctor since 2010. The images were so graphic they never released them to the public. It was clear in the last moments of her life she had been lying like this, unable to move, sitting in her own urine and feces, which insects and maggots were feasting on, and she was probably fully aware of this, as well as starving and dehydrated. All of this is happening while her parents Sheila and Clay watch on, the two pillars of the church and community.
Embedded, melted into a couch in her parents' Louisiana home.
He's seen a lot of neglect before. He said he's never seen a case like this.
What 36-year-old Lacey Fletcher went through is nothing short of a nightmare. Lacey never stood a chance at a normal life, not because of her condition, but because of her evil parents.
They walked by Lacey living like this for over 12 years. For over 12 years, they tortured her by just walking by her in this condition and leaving her that way. They lived in this house with this unimaginable stench of rotting decay as she lay there decomposing. They would have had to eat dinner in the dining room where they could smell this. They would have to walk by her daily and give her food and water. Yet they chose to do nothing about this in her condition. To add salt to the wound, when Sheila called 911, she could not even get her daughter's age right. She guessed incorrectly 3 times before finally settling on the age 31, which was still incorrect. Lacey was 36 years old. Her parents also had been away the weekend before the Monday that they called 911. So Lacey had been left alone to die that weekend while her parents were out on vacation. There was no one there to care for her, no one to bring her food or water while they were gone, or to take her to go to the bathroom. So they just left her there to starve and dehydrate to death. You can't go without water for more than 72 hours, so this very well could have been a contributing factor to her death. This obviously brings up a lot of questions, like how long were her parents gone for at different times where she was left by herself? Did they go away often? If they were unable to care for her, then why didn't they get help? Or why didn't they put her into a care facility? How were they able to hide this for so long from everyone? To where no relatives or friends or neighbors were questioning where Lacey was. Plus, investigators said it was the most intense odor at the scene. So was no one ever in the vicinity of their home?
They go to church, every weekend, and do anything for anybody.
The neighbors were in disbelief. A very close family friend of the Fletchers named Jess Easley testified that she had known the family 25 years, and that she didn't even know they had a daughter despite their weekly catch-ups. How did the parents hide Lacey when people were coming to the house? How did people not smell the stench? One went to church with them and said the Fletchers would do anything for anyone, which seemed to be the general consensus. According to what another neighbor told the media, one of the other neighbors saw Lacey on the couch and forced Sheila to make the 911 call. If this is true, then Lacey's parents' deep, dark secret would have never gotten out, because they may have never called 911 if not had been forced to do so. The investigation into Lacey's death began immediately after her body was discovered. According to investigators, the conditions inside the Fletcher home were relatively clean and orderly, which made Lacey's environment on the couch stand out even more. This discrepancy highlighted the specific neglect she endured, as other areas in the home appeared well kept.
One report says that Lacey had begun suffering from locked-in syndrome. This is a very rare condition where the patient is completely mentally cognate, yet unable to move parts of their body. According to this report, Lacey became locked into a position with her legs crossed on the couch. However, according to another report, Dr. Ewell denied Lacey having this syndrome. He said, "I don't know where that term came from or what source it came from. In all my years as a practicing physician, I have never heard of that term. The only diagnosis that I know she did have was first social anxiety, severe autism, and that's it. Those are her only 2 diagnoses.
When they found her body, she weighed only 96 pounds. The autopsy showed they found pads of the sofa as well as feces inside of her stomach, which means she was so hungry she actually started eating the couch around her. This actually goes against the lockdown syndrome theory, because if she had locked-in syndrome, she wouldn't even be able to move her arms, hands, or her mouth in that way in order to be able to eat the cushions, in which Dr. Ewell adamantly says in a report that she does not have. There were also signs that she had been trying to lift herself off from the couch, probably in an effort to relieve pain from the bed sores. Some reports claim that the floorboards beneath the couch had even started to deteriorate because there was so much feces and urine on them. Other reports state her parents would be sitting feet away from her, watching TV. When detectives spoke to Sheila and Clay about the situation, they explained that Lacey had developed autism in 9th grade, and that when she started homeschooling, she basically locked herself to that couch and also began using it as a toilet. Both Clay and Sheila claimed Lacey was of sound mind and that it was her choice to remain on that couch. Sheila claimed she would often move her and clean her bed sores. She said Lacey never complained of any pain. They said they brought Lacey meals and water. They said they had a portable potty for her that she refused to use. Obviously, everything at the scene directly contradicts all of these claims. There is unequivocal evidence to the contrary. Friends and family also said they complained to them at times that when they signed up to be parents, they didn't sign up to be caregivers.
It is. There were insect droppings, rodent, mouse droppings all over on the mantle near the fireplace. But talking about her legs being crossed, basically because of her condition, and this has been years, her legs were crossed because they were in contractures. What we call contractures. The muscles, tendons, bones just become so immobile from not being moved that they just stiffen and they stay that way. And she was like that in that position because she was in so much pain that she was trying to lift her body out of that hole because it hurt, it stung, it was horrible. She didn't have the energy to lift her body out of that hole.
The details given from witnesses about Lacey's condition were so gruesome and horrific. Like from how Lacey's poor body was positioned that she was trying to lift her body off the couch and was unable. The house was infested with rodents just around the couch. On May 2nd, 2022, a grand jury was held and it was determined there was enough evidence to move forward with a trial against the Fletchers for the second-degree murder of their daughter Lacey. On May 3rd, 2022, they were arrested. Shockingly enough, 2 days after their arrest, they were allowed out on a $300,000 bond. The arraignment was that summer of 2022, and the trial was predicted to start in October of 2022. However, after their release, the first indictment was actually overturned because of the wording in it. So they were rearrested in June of 2023. They were indicted again by a grand jury which wanted to see them face trial.
I opened the door, walked into the house. There was a stench, an odor, these fecal matter, urine. You couldn't hold your breath. But that's just to put it lightly. Ewell had been the coroner for 3 decades. Needless to say, he'd seen his fair share of disturbing sights and smelled a lot of uncanny things.
Dr. Ewell Bickham could not release specifics with a pending grand jury hearing, but told me in his 30 years as a practicing physician, he could not eat for a week and cried for a week.
On top of what Dr. Bickham said in his testimony, there was 6 more hours of evidence that they went over in the trial. In that evidence, Dr. Patrick Hain, a forensic pathologist, testified that he had previously advised her parents that Lacey should have been hospitalized. He reportedly told them that Lacey's condition required urgent medical care, including hospitalization, but they ignored this advice. Dr. Hain's testimony further strengthened the case against the Fletchers, suggesting that they were aware of Lacey's need for professional medical intervention, but failed to act. His testimony was instrumental in demonstrating that her parents had knowledge of her deteriorating health and the need for hospital care, making the subsequent neglect leading to her death even more serious in the eyes of the law.
The parents of a woman found dead and basically rotting on a couch in deplorable conditions have entered a no contest plea today in court. Chris Rosado spoke with the prosecutor. He's here to explain what that means. Chris.
Yeah, well, I'm told that by entering a no contest plea to manslaughter, that means Clay and Sheila Fletcher are not contesting the charge, but they are accepting it. So the original charge for second-degree murder was tossed out by a judge back in 2022 due to some conflicting language. When Lacey was found, the coroner described the scene as appalling and horrific because of the condition of the body and the couch where she was found. It was also determined that starvation was one of the main causes of her death.
You know, you wouldn't treat your animals like that. If you had a horse that was in a stall behind your house and, you know, you go back there and it's just the flesh is gone from its body and you can see bones exposed, I mean, you wouldn't even treat your animal like that.
So the district attorney is asking for at least a 40-year sentence for both parents. The sentencing date is scheduled for March 20th, and it'll be there where the parents will have to answer for their actions. Liz?
All right, Chris Rosado, thank you.
The Fletchers were finally brought to trial in March of 2024. At the last minute, though, they changed their plea from not guilty to guilty. Of course, Clay and Sheila still claim that Lacey refused medical attention. However, their lies did not help them escape a conviction. Both of them took a deal from the judge where they pleaded no contest to a lesser charge of manslaughter. They were sentenced to 40 years each with 20 years suspended. They both cried during the trial and showed their very first ounce of remorse since this entire thing started. They were both 66 years old at the time of sentencing. Community outrage was high, as many people in Slaughter, Louisiana were shocked and horrified when details of Lacey's death were made public. Given that her parents, Clay and Sheila Fletcher, were known as well-regarded community members who held local government roles, many residents felt betrayed. Locals expressed disbelief and anger that this level of neglect could occur, especially under the watch of individuals whom the community had trusted and respected. Social media erupted with calls for justice, with many people demanding that the Fletchers be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. The Fletchers prided themselves on community and the fact of Slaughter being a strong, tight-knit community. If this was the case and Lacey needed help and was refusing to take Clay and Sheila's medical advice, then they could have relied on and leaned on help from the, in response to the case, community members organized gatherings to discuss what had happened, while local news outlets were flooded with feedback from people expressing shock and outrage. This anger quickly spread beyond Slaughter, igniting broader conversations on the neglect of vulnerable adults and sparking calls for reform in how such cases are identified and prevented. To watch your child rot and die on your couch is a form of evil that I never knew existed. Do you think the punishment the Fletchers got fit the crime? Leave your answers in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys soon.